The final talk of the day and also of the conference. And we are kind of moving forward in a way as well. I'm very happy to have Harrison with us. Harrison, come on, come over. Harrison, everyone. I already have some questions prepared for you, Harrison.
Amazing.
But I'm not going to go there right there.
All right.
So Harrison is the Director of Product Design at LinkedIn. Anybody uses LinkedIn? Okay, well, I don't know why.
Oh, I heard cheers.
Yeah.
Yeah. Clap it up.
Fantastic. Well, I could say a lot of things about what the talk will be about, but you'll share it on your own. But there is an important fact that you have told me years ago that I have to bring up because this is fantastic.
Okay.
Well, it says it right here. Maybe it's not bright anymore. But there is a stock photo that you have that ended up on a billboard on Sunset Boulevard in Hollywood. How did that work?
Yeah. Well, I'm actually going to go into it a little bit on my talk. So you fed it in there. But that'll be a good Easter egg for everybody.
Okay. Well, in general, I think when I think about like what we're doing and how we're working in this industry, sometimes we're kind of navigating in this really difficult space. Like, what are we going to do next? What should we be doing? How should we be working? And also being as a design leader, manager also in LinkedIn, when you have a team and you need to help them move faster and do things and do the right next thing, right? And I'm kind of really excited how we can all fit it in somehow, doing the good work. And also maybe a bit of AI, sprinkle a little bit of AI, maybe along the way.
Sprinkled in.
And I'm very excited to see what we can actually do. So please give a warm round of applause to Harrison.
We made it. We're finally at the last talk of the conference. And so happy you all decided to stay for my talk. I'll be talking about design's new frontier leading in the AI disruption. Obviously, it's a very broad topic. I'll just tell you what, there's going to be a lot of stories in my talk today. But first off, I want to ask a question to the audience. How many of you all are working on some AI product right now? All right, so we've got a few folks sprinkled in there. How about this? How many of you all have actually felt that your organizations are actually working with a little bit less or maybe even moving faster? All right, so we have a few folks. All right, so look, I'll tell you this. Over the last like two and a half years, it's felt a lot like a sprint. We can kind of go from, before COVID, we were talking about working remotely, getting into blockchain, crypto. Along with that, we then moved along to NFTs, and then we started talking about this thing called generative AI. Look, it's inevitable that AI will transform almost every aspect of our world, right? We're in it today, and there's a huge technological revolution that's actually happening right now. Now, for most of us, we do work in technology, and we have a little bit of the liberty of being on the bleeding edge of what this looks like, right? I will say what we've seen over time in history, when there are big technological shifts, right, it tends to be tech first, but the impacts on our society tend to lag, right? But that's even more of a reason for us as design orgs to really step up and understand the role that we play as these roles and as these demands are starting to shift, all right? But I will say this, I do think that we're at a little bit of an existential crisis, right? Organizations are moving extremely quickly. They're hiring tons of engineers. There's a ton of product managers that are also driving these initiatives. So where does design fit into all of this today? Now, I love this image. This is Psyduck. And I will tell you, frankly, that there have been times that I've felt like this. Now, Psyduck's superpower happens when he is very stressed out. And that's a good thing sometimes, right? I think for myself, when things are a little bit more chaotic, I think it's really important to make sure that we take a deep breath and look at the current reality of things. And, I will say this, I think it feels even more overwhelming when you go to websites like LinkedIn, and there's a ton of content right? A ton of content in terms of saying what the right thing to do in design, talking about outdated concepts that may not necessarily be relevant in this time, whereas when we might be thinking about how to get a seat at the table, right? Whether it be from maturity models, what does that look like? I think a lot of these things are truly in flux right now. And so I really hope that with this breakneck speed of how things are going, we need to actually make sure that we're in the rooms where a lot of the decisions are being made. Now, a little bit about me. Number one, my passion is about leading design teams so they can build their best products, right? So we can reach our highest potential. I've been at LinkedIn for over 7 years, which is an eternity when it comes to Silicon Valley. And at LinkedIn, I lead our ads business. The way that I generally like to say is that we find out how we can connect our over 1 billion members with our companies. And so that looks like a number of different things. That may be ads on the feed, that may be within Campaign Manager, where marketers are able to create and launch their campaigns and ultimately see how effective they are, right? Are they getting any ROI out of that? One of the things that I truly have loved about LinkedIn over the past year is that we've learned really fast at how we can start to integrate AI into our products. One of the things that you see up here is our AI-assisted marketing creation. And so simply somebody needs to put in a description, and then we will essentially figure out who that audience is. We'll then also suggest ad creatives, and along the way, we're informing them what we do. There's a lot of really great things in this experience. Now, as I said before, I work at LinkedIn, and so I'm usually the butt of many jokes, right? You all have seen the LinkedIn memes. You've seen the LinkedIn cringe. I'm surprised how subdued it has been at this conference, so I appreciate you all very, very much. I made a joke last night that I'm LinkedIn personified, but let's not do that. And so one fun fact is that I came out here all the way from outside of San Francisco. A fun fact about where I live right now, I live in a place called Hayward, and I joke about this all the time because there's actually a pretty big name from Hayward, and that's The Rock. So The Rock was born in Hayward, and that's about it. He doesn't talk about it anymore, but that's the only claim to fame that I at least kind of say about where I live. And really touched a little bit about me being a stock photo. Now, before the likes of Lumi, I was my own stock photo for some time. I found my way on the billboards, found my way on the ads, bus stops, and that billboard on Sunset was probably one of my lifetime achievements. The most hilarious thing about that billboard is that it was for a car wash. All right, so let's get into it. A lot of the talks that we've been hearing today have really been focused about sort of the craft and a bit into the process. But today, we're gonna actually go a little bit earlier in that, right? Before sort of like the PRDs are finalized and that ideation begins, we're gonna start from the planning side of things. So I have a story that I will be talking about you through because, again, we're moving into this new frontier and the stakes are fairly high. And the person I want to introduce you to is Ernest Shackleton. So Ernest Shackleton was an explorer, and he led 3 expeditions across the Antarctic. One expedition in particular was his second, and his goal was to actually cross the full Antarctic. Now, his crew wasn't the only ones that were actually looking to make this achievement. And the story of Shackleton is very entrepreneurial. He went on to raise, the funds to do that. And in addition, in the LinkedIn way, he interviewed over 500 sailors to really end up with about 27, including himself. And so, unfortunately, Shackleton and his crew never actually ended up crossing the Antarctic. A year into their expedition that left from Buenos Aires, the ship was actually stuck in an ice pack. And so you can imagine your ship gets stuck, And slowly over time, the ice is moving to the point that the bow breaks, another thing breaks, and eventually it slowly sinks. That goal of being able to achieve your dreams and cross the Antarctic vanishes slowly. Now, the thing about this, in terms of why I want to tell you this story, right? Why am I telling you about this harrowing expedition? Is because there's a few things that we can learn from it, all right? Look, design organizations are facing an unprecedented set of circumstances, right? I'd say that most of the time, if I do ask leaders and individuals, it's a really lofty goal, right? To ever achieve this idea of best in class, right? It's ever fleeting because the needs of our users change, right? The bar is always changing and the expectations are also changing as well. But oftentimes we're hearing it in terms of that Nike, right? Apple, Airbnb. You fill in the blank name of that design-centric organization. But the reality of it is that it's much harder than it's cracked up to be, right? A picture is worth 1,000 words, but there's just so many words, endless words, that talk about the work that goes into it. And so really, there's three things that I really want to go over in this in terms of high level, right? It's facing the truths of the reality, right? When we think about what Shackleton did, he had to pivot from, again, exploring Antarctica to survival. Number two, keeping his crew aligned, because it's important that there are a regimen involved, right? It's important that there's alignment to keep the psyche feeling great despite some of the dire circumstances. And the third point is ensuring the health and survival of his team, and ultimately moving in a place where a team can grow and feel good about the work that they're doing. So let's kick off, right? Let's face the truth of our reality. Layoffs.fyi, according to Layoff.fyi, since 2022, there have been close to 500,000 layoffs globally, especially in the tech sector. And design has really, unfortunately, been hit pretty hard by these. I do believe a big reason for a lot of that is just because there's just not really a strong value proposition in these organizations where decisions are being made that we are present at. And there's a lot more that we can do there. Additionally, we are doing a lot more with less, right? So again, we talked about this huge disruption that's happening, whether it be from RTO, remote work, layoffs, this move quickly into AI-first experiences. There's just so many things that we have to do. Also, the skills that are required out of designers, specifically when we talk about generalists, go from things like accessibility to design systems, to thinking about mobile, to thinking about user research. There's so many things. And the folks that are in smaller design organizations feel this probably the hardest, right? It's really hard to do anything good when there's so much that you have to think about. Additionally, when we start thinking about all of this, when you're moving tech first, sometimes companies are trying to find what the product market fit is. And so understanding what the business goals are a little bit fuzzy. And finally, as I mentioned, teams are doing a lot more than less. But I'll give you all some hope, right? I think design organizations are extremely malleable, right? There's a spectrum in terms of how we show up. It can be in the form of executing and delivering work, which I'm sure many of you all wouldn't necessarily feel great about doing all of the time, or it can show up in a way that we are leading and being strategic partners. And so part of what I want to go into today is tactically how can we do that. So I'll be giving you some stories. There'll be some resources for you all to actually take and hopefully bring to your design team and perhaps maybe even influence some of your managers, your other colleagues as well. I like to say this, right? We've seen disruption before. I love talking about the printing press. Printing press had a huge effect. It was a huge technological feat and played an extremely important role in the information age. And we can almost look back, right? If we go to New York City, there were whole entire blocks, whole economies that were centered around this machine. There were delivery services, there were studios. And you go today, and maybe some of those things don't exist anymore, but it's just evolved. Many of these things have become digitized, right? We've seen that graphic designer obviously evolve into the product designer and move on from there. So there is some precedence, there's still hope, and it's important for us to know that we will survive, but maybe some of our roles are going to shift. But let me take you a little bit into a day in the life for me. This is about perhaps maybe 4 or 5 months ago. And it kind of goes a little bit like this, almost kind of like a paperboy shows up, right? But that paperboy is using corporate jargon, right? So when there's a technological advancement to disrupt and capture market attention, and we really think there's a huge opportunity and upside for product market fit, and we have a strong go-to-market strategy on this, right? It usually ends up with the team hiring and doing something a little bit like this.
Developers, 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 developers. Yes.
Now, that video loops. I've watched that video a gazillion times, and I can't tell you how excited I was to add it to this. But it usually goes along with hiring more developers and more project managers. And, usually that shows up to me a little bit something like this, right? So, Harrison, do you need help with me? We're good? So, Harrison, how are you prioritizing the work? Or, hey, my Eng team is ready to go, but design's a blocker. I know that's familiar for a lot of you guys. Sure, that team has priority, but my team has priority. The boss thinks my project has more significance. And the difficult piece about that is, well, how do I say no to something like that, right? I've got 3 people pulling me in 3 different directions. It's quite the dilemma. But again, if we go back to figuring out what the reality of the situation is, right, taking that deep breath, I soon realized that there were so many developers and so many product managers that were hired on these extremely opportunistic things that I had a 4-to-1 ratio of product managers to designers. That just was not sustainable. And so this was one of those instances where it was really important for us to take stock of everything and all the requests that were coming in, right? It really honestly felt a lot like Finding Nemo. And that's the ratio of PMs to me, right? So, one of the things that we ended up doing is doing quarterly planning. Now, we were doing quarterly planning before, but there was kind of like this option of maybe we do things every half of the year. The fact of the matter is, when there's any sort of live product that we're working on, there's always going to be some sort of pivot that could happen, right? It may be due to the business, it may be due to macro, it may be due to policy, right? There are things that might change over time. And so there are really kind of 2 pieces that we approach planning with, right? And we think about that in terms of the level of effort here. And so that comes down to problem identification and definition, and planning and organization. Here's what that might look like. So there's about 3 bullets for both of these. And when it comes down to, give me 1 second, guys. I need to adjust something. There we go. So when it comes down to the problem identification and definitions, there's really 3 steps. Number 1, as I mentioned before, identify, understand the requests that are coming in across all cross-functional partners, okay? So that means that if there's any sort of feature, new product, maybe there are slide decks, even if it comes down to one-off bug bashes, it's important to make sure that we're actually tracking what this is. The second piece here is identifying who those stakeholders are and making sure that we're aligned on the definition of what these things are, okay? So talking is key, right? It's not just about looking at the stream of information and acting on it, it's actually being a bit more inquisitive. And then based on those discussions, actually meeting with our product and eng partners to have a consensus in terms of what that definition is. The second step is getting into planning and prioritization. So this is the part that gets to be a bit more tangible here. So understanding what the scope of work is, right? We don't want to commit to something that is going to eventually scope creep into something that's multiple quarters. The second piece is prioritizing, right? So what does this mean to the business? Because as I mentioned before, when you have 4 PMs to 1 designer, everyone wants to prioritize and move fast and have it delivered yesterday. And so really, what is the importance of this? And the third piece is developing a model around escalation. And so what escalation means is if there's not a clear definition, we have a clear process of who we would talk to and ultimately who would make the decision. And so in this case, we wanted to make sure that the decision was a high-ranking executive here. Now, when it comes to thinking about scope, right, when it comes to what that ultimate currency in, it's time. And it's really important that we make the math here, okay? So, this is simple math, but a lot of times these things get lost. One of the things I appreciate about using a shared language specifically around sprints is that engineers often measure these things in terms of like agile process. So we want to make sure that we align to some of that, right? Because there's a lot of empathy. If you talk to engineers, right, they're saying, hey, we're looking at engineering hours, and when they actually plan and think about their allocation from a resource perspective, they're thinking about sprint hours. And so they're hiring based upon how can we reduce the time to ship something by actually workforce. And so it's real simple stuff. A year is 4 quarters. In those quarters, there's 12 weeks. Within those 12 weeks, within those 12 weeks, we have sprints. We look at those. Within that, we have 6 sprints. And then if we think about it from a design perspective, our designers have a capacity maximum of 12 weeks. And we can almost ensure that it's going to take at least 2 weeks of onboarding for a designer there. Now, I added asterisk here because these numbers are best case scenario. This is real life. So there's going to be, unexpected circumstances, and there's going to be holidays. We want to make sure that our workforce is happy. And so a lot of times, we generally tend to think in terms of how can we show up, right? We want to show our value, right? We want to have these tangibles, but in actuality, we're constrained with time. And so the most important piece and salient piece, at least, that I want folks in this room to talk about is creating boundaries, right? Design is not an elastic resource. And this is an important concept to really make sure that it hit home for managers, designers, and cross-functional teams. Because sometimes you might be like, you know what, I'm not doing anything tonight, so I'm going to go ahead and work a little bit extra on this thing. But with every single piece of effort that we do, it actually creates more reliance and more dependence. And so this is going to be a little bit around like creating more boundaries, right? Because again, the value is in the work that we do, and if we give it away, then it will not be valued as much. When we get into this idea of priorities, right, I think there's a really great opportunity to speak and be closer to the business. And this doesn't require you all to go and get an MBA, right? There are some very relevant things that the company is already doing that you can start to share that language with. For example, is the work you're doing a company priority? Is the work you're doing an organizational priority? In the scale of priorities, right, from a P0 perspective, how do you design that? So we use P0. That's the first priority of things. So if we're ever developing an MVP, those are going to be P0s. Anything after that moves into P1, P2. So P1 you might see as enhancements, and P2s might be more or less vision work. So just to kind of conclude with this, here's a little link to a template that you all can actually scan that with your phone and hopefully do an exercise, right? The work here in this worksheet, I made it pretty simple. So it's for an e-commerce website. Hopefully a lot of the concepts already sort of resonate with you, but you can imagine that if you scale this work up, it becomes even more impactful because you start to see that larger picture. I'll give you all a little bit. I see a few folks still on their phones. All right, 5 seconds, and now we'll switch. All right. The next piece here, right, when we talk about Ernest Shackleton, is making sure the crew is aligned. And so this is a picture of Shackleton as the team was stranded. At one point, they actually weren't on land. They were on ice. And, one of the pieces about this photo is that Shackleton would not accept death, right? He used a systems approach to create a strong team bonding that could handle the difficult situations that they faced. On this next slide, I'm going to play a little bit of an audio piece from a video that John Cutler, a former product manager and org design thinker, created around hiring designers. And I think this really speaks to when organizations scale and when actually there isn't that much balance, right? Where we start moving away from doing the work that truly matters to process. Let's play it.
In this short video, I'm going to try to persuade you to hire more designers and to embed them on teams. Welcome to our small team of skilled software developers. They've got a great startup idea, but they have a problem. They really need to hire a designer. So they do. They hire Felix. Felix sits with the team and pairs daily with the developers, and their product begins to get traction. The team hires 2 more developers. At this point, the team is pulling work from one list. Felix adds his magnets to the work items that involve design. Most do. The team adds more developers. Felix has his hands full, but he's able to manage. If he has a sense of what is in the to-do list, he's able to juggle how he spends his time and energy. At a certain point, it becomes hard to operate as a team of 8 developers. So the team splits into 2 teams of 4. The changes for Felix are subtle. A couple examples: he now has to go to 2 stand-ups and the other shared meetings. He also has to scan 2 boards for their respective to-do lists. Felix's context switching and administrative overhead increase. Whereas before Felix could confidently start together with his fellow team members, now he is tempted, as his schedule gets more hectic, to get upstream and grapple with and finish design work before handing off the work to developers. This is not ideal. But he has to, otherwise he can't confidently manage his time. What starts to happen, in fact, is that Felix begins to run his own list. Items in his list link to items in their list. He still considers himself a team member, but he's becoming slightly less connected. And we start to see another problem. Felix is left wondering about the relative priority of the items in his list because he doesn't have a way to do an apples-to-apples comparison of potential value. Felix's time is precious, so it becomes increasingly important to estimate and converge on work so Felix can try to pack it all into a schedule. Felix gets forced into Tetris playing, which means that Felix has even less flexibility to be available for ad hoc requests and opportunities to collaborate. At the same time, the team is packing its schedule. Combined, this even further discourages collaboration and iteration. Whereas before they were shipping frequently, iterating, and focusing on outcomes, now they're delivering projects in a single batch and then moving on immediately.
Oh man, we feel for Felix. And I'm sure that's a very familiar feeling for a lot of you all. And this is really a big crux of this, right? Because we're now getting into this world where we're doing just administrative work. Right? Hopefully we get the time to do the things that we love, but there's just so much that we have to do. And so what we see here with Felix, right? We see a daunting number of projects, right? The team is overwhelmed and getting impatient with the work that he's doing, and there's just not a clear focus, right? And I'll tell you this, Felix is probably not feeling too great about the job, right? When it comes to Felix's career, is this really what he wants to do? And so the piece here that I want to really iterate is that with teams, when we think about doing all that work and capturing all these things, there's some really great opportunities to look at themes, right? Because when we're looking at all of our projects, right, we're able to quantify everything that's coming in, right? We looked at the scale of work that was happening. We can actually look at the themes and how much efforts are there from an initiative perspective. And then additionally, that actually gives us some confidence because we can kind of expect what's going to happen, right? And so there's a couple different ways we can look at this idea of themes, right? They can show up in multiple ways, right? They can show up from a business perspective, right? They can show up from a customer's perspective, right? Is this an enterprise? Is this an SMB? Is this an individual creator, for example? They might show up on an initiative. So, for example, maybe a growth opportunities on teams. They can show up as jobs to be done, right? What are different workflows in the system? They might show up for business, like, for example, LinkedIn. We have an ads business. We have a sales business. We have our consumer app. Or they might show up on a surface level. So it might be the home page or the checkout page. So these themes are really important because it allows organizations, number one, to understand what are the most important themes that everyone is talking about. If there's any sort of questions from Eng, if there's any questions from design or any cross-functional partners, right, there's really great questions that you can actually bring into foundational research. And ultimately, you can understand what stakeholders are involved in what. I will say the bonus here is that if you're working with an outmatched number of folks, there's some opportunities potentially even to consolidate the effort here. Now, we've already talked about facing reality. We've talked about aligning on the teams. And now let's talk about how we ensure the survival of those teams. Now, again, the stakes aren't necessarily a life or death situation in the scope of work that we do. But again, I think this is an important message to really speak to. And, you know, Shackleton really had no idea how to get his team home safely, right? There were so many different circumstances. But one important thing that he knew is that no one was going to come save them. As I mentioned before, they were stranded in ice. However, he was able to make sure that his team could actually rest on land. The name of the place was called Elephant Island. And at that point, he had realized that his team had been training for so long, they'd had such a good camaraderie with each other, they knew how to help each other and survive, that they would be okay. And he actually set out and left for 3 months. Right? He took 4 other men with him to find help. Look, I think the important piece here that I want to impart upon you guys is that we have to rethink what the business of design is in some cases, right? It's not necessarily about proving ROI all of the time. In fact, I would say if we had stronger relationships with our cross-functional teams, we'd actually be able to leverage some of the information that they have, right? It's also not about design maturity, because what we've seen is that maturity can be shook, right? We've seen so many layoffs. We've seen research teams. We've seen content teams that are a lot smaller than they used to be. And so these organizations have had to really pivot beyond that. When things are dire, these idealisms don't matter, right? So it's really important to really focus on that. And then one piece of here that I want to talk to is that we do have a seat at the table. And it's really important to figure out how we engage having that seat at the table. So there's a report that came out a couple years ago from Nielsen Norman Group around the state of design teams. And there's really, 3 different types of teams. So there's distributed, there's hybrid, there's centralized, and decentralized. So centralized is exactly what it sounds like. Like there's actually a direct reporting structure to a VP of design or a C-level design. When it comes to decentralized, design teams might be distributed within different business units, and they might actually report to a general manager or a head of product. And then we have a hybrid approach, which there is a design organization and a design leader, but those teams are embedded within different orgs, right? Majority of companies that sort of look at these types of structures generally live in that hybrid piece, right? And so I think this is actually a really great opportunity to leverage what it means to be from a business, or how to lead from a business perspective here, right? Look, the value of organization is that they really can't scale with thoughtful experiences without us. Keyword is thoughtful, right? I'm not saying that we can be replaced, but companies can ship products without design. They may not work well. They may not necessarily deliver a ton of value to users, but it can happen. But I think that's a really great opportunity, right? Because I think the alignment with product piece is really key here. Because a lot of times when organizations do report to product, the funding in terms of getting that headcount comes from our product teams, right? It's actually a superpower. We don't have to go through a ton of different levels to actually interface with our product leaders. And so it's important for us to speak these truths into existence. And so again, right, while it doesn't seem ideal, decisions on priorities need to be placed back on product and on our eng teams. And so let's take everything that we spoke about and put it into existence, right? I'm going to bring up this really fun diagram of showing the thing and changing the thing. Do you guys want to say it with me? Showing the thing and changing the thing, right? So a lot of the work that we went through gives us confidence at a bird's eye, right? We see all of these projects. We see the themes associated with them. We're looking at the prioritization of them. And then we have really kind of the team morale and buy-in aspect of it. You have at times really, you really have an opportunity to kind of show what's actually you're dealing with to actually come to the table and negotiate, right? You can't win the lottery if you don't buy a ticket, right? But it's a matter of really pressing that button. And, I will say this is easier said than done. And I think in my mind when this happened, do I press the button or do I not? Well, if I don't press the button, then I'm probably going to keep being in this bit of turmoil. But there's a point where I really need to draw the line. And so I did that. So you can imagine it's 7 a.m. and you get an email from me, right? It says urgent. It's me. I'm being that guy. And this is the case where it should be an email. And, this is really kind of like, again, like that complex assembly of contradicting issues. We've got people that say we're a blocker. We've got people saying maybe we're focused on the wrong things. But, with all of that information that I had with me, I went ahead and sent that to the chief of staff, our VP, our senior directors. And I'll tell you what, I was looking like this. But again, it's important to speak your piece, right? Because there's going to be so many complaints, right? You're going to hear an orchestra of people that are not so sure about what you're saying. But there's a lot of work that does go into this. And this conversation proceeded over probably about 2 more months, right? The initial email went out. We then went through that worksheet. We took that worksheet and socialized it to our product manager leads. We went to executive leadership and set expectations in terms of the exercise that we were doing, so there was some accountability. We then socialized the decisions after they were made from our product leaders, and we went into planning accountability by basically saying, hey, we need to time box this within a certain amount of days because we got to move forward with the biz, right? So remember that conversation that I had earlier, right, where it was really difficult to kind of figure out what to do with this information. I can now go back and say, you know what? Sure, all of this makes sense, but we did an exercise with your executive team. You should speak with them. And you all should be responsible for making trade-offs, right? Making trade-offs for the business. Because a lot of times, when we're stuck in these organizations that are really focused on revenue, does every number actually matter? Probably doesn't. But this is something that's really important to tackle from the bottoms up and the tops down, right? What we saw were examples of PMs knowing what the challenges of not having those resources. We also shows what happens now that when we show up to the table, we're starting to speak to the value of designs. Now, this likely won't happen immediately, right? But if there's enough discontent, things are going to start to change. As I mentioned before, this was only about 3 months. We saw a 47% reduction in terms of funding on projects. We also ended up getting headcount for 4 full-time hires, and we got funding for 3 contractors. One of the things I want to close out on this, on this presentation, specifically going back to Ernest Shackleton, is that every single person on his expedition ended up surviving, right? He was able to really fight for them and ensure their survival. And there's a hopefully better future for us, as an industry. Because I really do believe, right, in terms of the industry and getting more people into these roles, we've got to fight really hard to advocate for those and really showcase the value. I think the important piece here is that there's a lot of really impactful work that designers are doing. I'm on many hiring committees, and I see it. But we've got to do a better job of evangelizing these things in terms of the business outside of the hard skills. And so again, reframing the challenges of today, right? How can we be more reactive and be proactive, right? Instead of lack of understanding, what is everyone's perspective on the business right now? And then how do we adapt and prioritize accordingly? I hope you all enjoyed the talk today. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And additionally with that, as I mentioned before, we just launched we're launching a lot of AI products, but my team in particular just launched our AI-assisted marketing creation tool. And so if you actually follow my LinkedIn profile, a manager, a staff designer, and an IC actually posted some really great articles that give a deep dive in terms of how we work and the influence that we have on building AI products. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Harrison. Join me for a little conversation. That's been really insightful. I think one thing that came up, of course, and this is a very short question.
Okay.
But here we go. It goes like this.
Okay.
I'm Felix.
Ooh.
What should I do?
You're Felix, what should I? Okay. Yeah, that's a good. So I think, one of the things that's really striking about that is Felix might be dealing with a lot of that on his own, and he actually might not be communicating what's happening to his manager, right? In many ways, and I even think early in my career, I truly took that in myself and put that on my shoulder. One of the things that I didn't touch on, and I think is really important for designers, is this idea and this concept of managing up, whereas Felix is doing all of the right things from a role perspective, but you can imagine, right, Felix might not be delivering the work on time. He's doing all the right things, but work is constantly delayed. Engineering teams might say, hey, Felix is pretty late on this work, and Felix is trying his best. But if me as a manager, if I don't know what's happening there, it's very difficult for me to support that.
Right, but at which point would you say is the right timing to escalate it to management? Sometimes it feels like, oh yeah, I can manage it. Or it can also come in waves.
Yeah.
Like sometimes you get situations where, yeah, that's okay. And then all of a sudden there is everything that just comes and screams your way. How do you know that this is a good time? I mean, obviously, when you feel like you have to speak, that's already too late.
Too late, exactly.
How do you navigate that? Because, of course, you don't want to appear like you are not delivering and all of that.
Yeah, there's a couple different techniques, right? Like one of the things I truly encourage, if you're not having retros at least at a project level, it's important to at least have them at a quarterly level. One of the things that we also talk about, again, is really on the planning and prioritization. If we're going beyond that, right, I've myself along with my managers, we spend a lot of time looking at the planning process. And so if things aren't necessarily being delivered, or if we're going into design, reviews and Felix is like, yeah, it's not really clear in terms of what's needed for me or the scope is expanding, I would encourage him to actually say those out loud, right? So I think it's really important for organizations to make sure that there is room for feedback and they're doing that early and often.
One of the questions that also came up is, in general, now we look at the state of industry today and how things are evolving, and it's been the last couple of years were not necessarily the most, positive.
Yeah.
What do you think are some of the critical skills you think designers need to have or need to acquire, maybe, to stay relevant and be ahead of the game?
Yeah. I think having an open mind is pretty important. Obviously there's so much happening from an AI perspective. There are definitely some ethical, things tied to that.
Sure.
And I think people tend to, I don't want to say just we, but people tend to think about the worst things. I think sometimes it's important to think about if there's any sort of new technology, how can it be applied to something that you're familiar with? Sometimes that actually takes off a lot of what that could be. So that would probably be a good place to start. Curiosity is also just like a core skill and trait to have. I will say that I don't think there's a single design organization that's nailed like AI design. One thing that we generally tend to do, we do a lot of research. And if there's one thing that is true is that there's a lot of skepticism in terms of people adopting AI. So there's a lot of questions around trust, like where is this coming from, right? Like, can I control this? Like, can I intervene when necessary? And there's also way more modalities than just the ChatGPT or Perplexity.
Yep, absolutely. Also kind of building up on top of that, I think there is just a bit of concern about what is happening to the industry. I think there were a couple of articles, I don't know where, but a couple of big names articles claiming that, well, the industry is shaping now, changing again back to the UX-friendly, well, I would say tech-friendly, employee-friendly, I should say, space where salaries might go up again, we will maybe hire more people, but it didn't seem like it happened last year.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem like it's happening this year.
Yeah.
So I guess the question is also, what do you think it's moving? Like, just to give a personal experience as well. I live in Berlin, and we have kind of a club of unemployed developers and designers now, because there's, of course, a lot of people who were laid off as well. And the thing is that when they try to get hired now, the salaries have massively dropped. I don't know if this is the same feeling that you get maybe in Belgium or in Netherlands or UK or whatever you're coming from, but this is substantial. So if you were working maybe in a decent company, you were getting something 100 plus, 100K plus. Try to get that now in Berlin. It's just not happening, like at all. It's good luck with that. And so sometimes it's better to live off benefits, social benefits, with your previous salary than to get the kind of sign up for that job right now. So, and the question then comes up, so have we been at the peak of where we could be? Is it coming back? I mean, you cannot tell the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'm not an economist.
Yes, but how do you see this maybe evolving, changing?
Yeah, I think there is probably, there's a lot of conversations happening, right? I think one of the things in particular is like job descriptions. Yeah. And a lot of, again, like a big point of my topic was just like rethinking, some things are outdated. I think job descriptions actually haven't changed for probably 15 years. And, one of the things that I generally noticed over time is that actually names for a position changed based on sort of trends in the industry to attract talent. I think there is a retooling that probably needs to happen. And perhaps maybe the same skills that were relevant 10 years ago just aren't as valuable as they are today. I'm a big proponent of design truly being like strategic partners. And what that means is, thinking about the business. It's really being able to show up with those artifacts and speaking to examples of what things could be to move the conversation forward. And I'm not sure if I'm seeing a lot of that in that. Like, we generally might see that tied to, a principal designer, for example. But I actually believe that some of those skills actually should be a little bit more relevant to maybe senior designers or staff designers.
Dana is wondering, this is a very sad question. Got 3 pluses from other
3
people.
pluses, okay.
Yeah. What should I do if design is the first thing to be sacrificed in my company? Do you hear the silence?
Yeah, yeah. I know this sounds pretty corny, but I mean, I think LinkedIn is a really important tool.
I think you might be a little bit biased.
I think I'm probably pretty biased. I say this where I think it's important, like we talk about like case studies like a lot. I think for any project that you're working on, like build that case study while you're actually still doing it, and really speak to the value, right? Like I can't emphasize like impact and value, and that's impact within an organization, right? So what did you do to make that organization better than it was yesterday? Impact in terms of projects that you're actually delivering, like the results to customers. And also just be real in terms of the context of the constraints you're working with. These are all very necessary skills that are actually probably top of mind while you're in that role. So then that way, by the time that does, hopefully it doesn't happen, but if that does happen, you actually already have things that are there that you can actually speak to.
There's a fantastic question. Somebody is writing and then rewriting and then has rewritten multiple times, but I just wanted to bring it up. Then stopped.
No pressure. I actually see the cursor.
Yeah, I can see the cursor moving. I guess the question is, what can a team member do to help the management understand and support UX initiatives more? Even if it was already communicated, that seemed to just sometimes not get it.
Yeah.
Or can you feel the silence?
No, look, I've been there. So, I think that question really resonates. I think one of the things that is important is like speaking it into existence. I think sometimes if you have a manager that may not necessarily understand those things, it's important to really kind of find maybe a community, or maybe there's somebody else in the organization that might do those things, right? Being under a certain manager doesn't mean that like you're constrained to that, right? Maybe if things don't work out, there could be an opportunity to move to a different part of the organization. Maybe there's conversations that you could even have from a skip level perspective. But it's knowing that you do have these different levers. And also too, I think a big part of it is really showing up like with your cross-functional teams, right? If your engineers are seeing the value that you're bringing, if the product folks are seeing the value that you're bringing, there's a lot of influence that happens there that does create pressure to make that change happen.
Yeah, I think also from my perspective, maybe I would say is that it's so important, at least it's been for me, to just visualize what you're doing, and not in terms of the artifacts that you're delivering, but just having sort of a log of these are the little and big achievements that you have done. Yeah. So once you have this one-on-one with your manager, or once you have maybe a challenging conversation like this one, you can actually show that not only what you've been working on, but hopefully also the impact that you have been producing. Yeah. Right. So Harrison, knowing how optimistic you are, and having this as a closing session of the conference, does the future look bright?
No. Look. The reason that I did this talk is because I think this is a really important part of creating that future. I think a lot of what is needed today in this brave new world comes from a lot of the concepts and the things that we practice. And so it's really, really going to be important for us to have a stronger voice and hopefully more of a collective voice when it comes to the role that we play as design leaders, right? Because I do think the skills, I think the hard skills will always be there. That's a part of it, right? Just like with developers. But I do think like we need to inspire what that change is looking like and the impact that we're having a bit more.
So I take it as a yes.
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for being with us, Harrison.
Thanks, man.